Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So we're here this evening with Ayasoma to my right, Ton Wade to my left, and my name is Bhante Sudaso, and we're here for our weekly monk chat, the opportunity to ask any questions related to Buddhism, and you have a panel of 3 monks to attempt to answer. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start going through whatever questions there might be. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So first off, hello to all the people checking in online. So hello to John, Kumu, Karen, Bhumika, Geeta, Maria, Jeff, Jayanta, Jay, and all the other people watching. And I see a few questions appearing already. So we'll go ahead and start with these questions. So Jeff asks, how can we keep in mind the aim of release from suffering and seeking enlightenment while we follow the practices? I often, usually, lose track of the bigger picture. Ayasoma?
How can you lose the bigger picture? In the sense that, there's so much dukkha. I feel like, once again, the practices are a means to an end, not an end itself. So, there is actually a bit of a release actually from suffering through sensual pleasures. We shouldn't discount that. And I say that as monastic. And also the Buddha actually was always talking about that. He was inviting us to really look at the gratification in our experience, that there is the gratification in sensual pleasures. If there weren't any gratification in sensuality, we wouldn't be that crazy to pursue sensuality. We're not that crazy. We're pretty crazy, but not that crazy. So, one of the things that the Buddha says that I really, really love is that whatever, gratification there is in the world, he discovered it. So we have to really fully understand, which it doesn't mean like pursuing sensuality and doing all crazy stuff like ad infinitum, because there is quite a lot of crazy things pretty much everywhere in the world. Me being from Italy and coming all the way from the old continent to the United States. I'm pretty quite aware that there's a whole spectrum, a whole like sort of rainbow of samsara of different sort of varieties of sensual pleasures that we can get distracted. So, but what the Buddha is actually inviting us to see is really what is really the gratification in the experience. What is it that like essentially fools us in it? And really looking at that and also looking at the danger of it. Yeah, of course, there is some gratification in good food. If you have really good food, it's pretty great, right? So what is the gratification? Let's look at it. And what is the danger of it? It's clearly unreliable. For example, even in Italy that we have great good food, we used to actually have great good food 15 years ago when I used to live there. It was fantastic. And now I got back and it actually has changed. It's actually a little bit harder to find decent food. So even there, we can see how it's a little bit unreliable as a source of constant happiness. Globalization is destroying everything. So wherever you go now, whether it's Italy, Thailand, the United States, everything has become a little bit actually kind of bland, all mass produced. So clearly not a source of reliable happiness. And even 15 years ago, it wasn't a reliable happiness. After a while, it how much anything good can you introduce in your stomach before getting full and nauseated by it? The most delicious of delicious things. And also panorama, beautiful art. Literally what is truly satisfying. So we see also the danger. And then we're like, well, what's the escape? Well, usually I always kind of look for something else. If I'm kind of sick of vanilla ice cream, then I go to chocolate ice cream. And then when I'm sick of chocolate ice cream, I go to pistachio ice cream. Like it's always kind of like the same response that we have. And we're looking for miraculously a different result from our actions. So we start understanding how we essentially fool ourselves. We trick ourselves into doing the same thing over and over again. And we see the escape that the Buddha gives us, which is not, once again, hey, by the way, well, how about you try strawberry ice cream, but something else? How about we actually, just let go of our desire to begin with and kind of create instead conditions of happiness. But through this process, we really understand dukkha. The Buddha says that dukkha, and the Four Noble Truths, the noble truth of dukkha needs to be fully understood. And so once we fully understand dukkha, it can never be, we can never forget about it. So we can never lose track of the purpose of why we're training ourselves. What is the end goal?
Great. Thank you. And do you have any comments to add? Do you think that's sufficient?
I think that's good, yes.
Okay, great. And next question here is from John. So John says, I have an elderly dog in poor health. I can't leave him alone too long because he has a problem falling over and not being able to get up on his own. He also has trouble walking. My family has voiced concern that it is cruel that I haven't euthanized him. Am I correct that even in this situation would be breaking the first precept and be bad karma? I don't want him to suffer, but I also don't want to kill a sentient being. What advice can you offer? Well, one thing that I find really helpful in this situation is, first off, to take exactly the same scenario, but just replace the human being in the story. Replace the animal in the story with the human being. So let's say it's your mom. So I have an elderly mother in poor health. I can't leave her alone too long because she has a problem falling over and not being able to get up on her own. She also has trouble walking. My family has voiced concern that it is cruel that I haven't euthanized her. I don't want her to suffer, but I also don't want to kill my mother. What advice can you offer? When we put it in those terms, suddenly it becomes crystal clear what the answer is. So when we're talking about a family member or a friend that's a human, then there's no doubt in our mind what the right course of action is. So you take care of your mother, you take care of your friends. If they're sick or in pain, then you help them out as best you can. But euthanasia is generally not the right option. You help people out as much as you can. So briefly, as I understand it, yes, whatever one's justification for killing a sentient being is, that doesn't change the fact that intentionally killing a sentient being is in fact intentionally killing a sentient being and is not to be done. And Jen asks, do you believe that the Lord Buddha is still very much alive? Ton Wade, what do you think?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I ordained in the Lineage of Ajahn Chah and in Thailand, and the meditation masters say that in fact the Buddha is still alive in a way, although in a much different way than we might consider ourselves to be alive. The process of death and rebirth we find ourselves in is a process of wanting and making and attaching to bodies and various mental formations, mental states, and so on like that. And when we attain nibbana, we don't want and make and attach to a body again, but the heart becomes released. We're still alive, but utterly free from all these kinds of confines with the body and mental states. So I have faith. Actually, personally, I have faith that the Buddha is still alive in this way, but it's partly due to my faith in the meditation masters and the teachers I've had the privilege of learning from.
Okay. And Kumu says, in the Dakinavabanga Sutta on details of offerings, what does it mean? Appoint so many bhikkhus and bhikkhunis for me from the Sangha to give an offering. Well, this is actually explained in a fair amount of detail in the Vinaya Pitaka. So this is something which monks who study the Vinaya will know, but it's actually relatively uncommon for lay people to know the details of this. But one of the ways that someone can offer food to the Sangha is to notify a monastery, I want to provide a meal for this number of monastics. So maybe 5 or 10 or however many one has the resources. Even 2 is fine, or whatever, however many you can take care of that day. And then the monastery has someone who is designated as the meal assigner. And their job is to make sure that everybody gets an equal, fair chance to accept meal invitations of that sort. So that's what this means. So a layperson contacts the monastery and says, appoint, say, 5 bhikkhus and bhikkhunis for me to feed. And then the meal assigner monk will consult their charts of whose turn it is to go to a meal invitation, and they will send the specified number of people. And one of the important things about this is that it means you're not asking for specific people. So you're not saying like, oh, I specifically want Ayasoma, but forget the rest of those monks. I don't like the other ones. I just want to feed Ayasoma. Actually, you're not supposed to do that. Instead, the idea is that you are feeding the Sangha. And it doesn't matter which representative of the Sangha comes. You're just feeding the Sangha. So that's part of the reason why this is phrased the way it is it indicates that the donor is practicing impartiality in supporting Sangha members. Okay, sufficiently clear? Okay. And Wasabi-chan asks, how long should I stick with the meditation before deciding if it's for me or not? Ayasoma, do you want to answer this one?
Sure, I can try. Well, if you're on retreat, the length of the retreat, yeah, it's always good actually to have someone that one is learning from. Actually, that in general, you always want to be in spiritual practice. Until enlightenment, you always want to be ideally surrounded by people who are better than you. You actually never want to be the sort of the best of the best. But actually you want to aspire to be the one who knows the least. Not that you actually are intentionally knowing the least, but rather that you always try to surround yourself with people that are ahead of you in the path. And so that you can ask guidance and really talk about the struggles, especially with meditation practice. Bring forward the struggles that one might have, and so that the person can guide you towards kind of what guide you in the choice, rather than going like, oh yes, this is for me or this is not for me, but rather having a bit of a more holistic approach, because usually what we normally do in practice, both meditation, formal meditation, and informal meditation, so the rest of the practice that is not just sitting or walking or standing or lying down meditation, but all the rest, so sila, samadhi, and panya. our mind tends to go kind of like, we tend to do the things that we like to do, or the things that we are really good at doing already, right? So if we are already have a mind that inclines towards metta, we're like, oh yeah, let me do a lot of metta, especially with the cat here. He's so great. Our monastic cat, Teddy. Right? And then we're like, oh, I don't know, mindfulness of breathing, maybe not as fun as as metta, or vice versa, right? If our mind perhaps tends towards perhaps aversion, then it will be a little bit difficult for us to really invest the time and energy to cultivate a mind of metta. And so if we kind of just go by our likes and dislikes, and then we'll be very quick in deciding, as you phrased it, whether this meditation is for me or not, you know. But instead, if we actually have someone who can guide us and can also, you know, have a bit of an objective way of seeing the defilements, the kilesas that we're dealing with, then they can, give us a little bit more direction, more feedback that can inform our choices in a better way.
Okay. And Anjan asks, does success in Dhamma depend on intelligence? What do you think, Venerable?
Oh, interesting question. Well, of course, Dhamma is quite a broad term. There are quite a few practices that comprise the practice of Dhamma, all the way from giving and service to practicing meditation, sharing merit, and even listening to the Dhamma, listening to Dhamma talks. So I think that for example, something like breath meditation, if you can calmly sit and just be aware of your breath as you're breathing naturally, it actually doesn't necessarily require a whole lot of intelligence, but you can still get really wonderful results, and you grow in wisdom. I think that way, seeing things like impermanence, seeing the unsatisfactory nature of phenomena, and the not self nature of our breath and our bodies. So I think it isn't necessary to make progress in Dhamma to be intelligent, I'd say.
Okay. And Yuri says, I used to have good meditation states a couple of years ago. Now I meditate as often and I'm not getting anywhere. What is a monk experience to this? Well, I think it's very important to remember that Buddhist practice is far more than just the amount of meditation that we do. So of course, it's good to practice meditation, and generally speaking, it's good to practice meditation regularly and for extended periods of time. This is true. These are good things. But the degree and intensity of progress we make actually depends far more strongly on what we're doing the rest of the time than on what we're doing during the time that we're meditating. So actually what's most important is right view and morality. So cultivating right view, so through studying the Dhamma, especially through studying the suttas, reflecting deeply upon their meaning, considering how it applies to your life, reflecting on your own conduct, and asking yourself with objective sincerity, does my conduct of body, speech, and mind line up with the Buddha's teachings as found in the suttas? And being willing, if anything in your body, speech, or mind, if anything is not in line with the Buddha's teachings, then we will change it. So there needs to be that kind of firm resolution. And then really closely examining our conduct. What am I doing? Am I acting from a place of kindness, a place of thoughtfulness, a place of consideration? Am I making a sincere effort to be compassionate and gentle with the sentient beings that are affected by me? Am I making an effort to constantly purify my mind of any unwholesome patterns or processes or tendencies that appear? Am I constantly trying to develop serenity and self-restraint and equanimity under all conditions, no matter what circumstances I face on a moment-by-moment basis? because these are all things which strongly affect our meditation practice. So you actually can have the absolute world's best meditation technique, and you can be following that meditation technique exactly perfectly according to the world's best meditation instructions, and get absolutely nowhere with it because you have wrong view and bad sila. So without right view and good sila, your meditation practice is not going to get very far, if it gets anywhere at all. So that's what I would encourage you to reflect on is what are you doing the rest of your time when you're not meditating? And if by some chance, actually you are 100% absolutely perfect the rest of the time, then there might be something wrong with your meditation techniques, and we can talk about that. But most of the time, 99% of the problem is what we're doing when we're not meditating, rather than what we're doing when we are meditating. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And Jiang asks, what does the Buddha say about chanting in Kundalini?
Nothing.
Well, that was easy. Yeah, Kundalini actually comes from a particular branch of Hinduism. It has nothing to do with Buddhism at all. And Sonia is saying, about 10 years ago, I received an inner calling of the green Tara. I was not familiar with her, so I started studying and chanting the mantra. I'm looking for guidance. Ton Wade, can you offer guidance? Green Tara practice?
I can't. No, I'm sorry. So other than to find a more advanced practitioner, sure, the first step, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think you don't do green Tara practice either. No,
Nope.
Neither do I. Yeah, you'll need to find somebody who specializes in green Tara practice, because it looks like none of us do. If you want to talk about mindfulness of the body, then we could probably help you quite a bit better.
Maybe we should specify that Gritara is usually a practice done in the Tibetan tradition. And so none of us here that I know of anyway has much experience in that tradition, or at least definitely not. I have a little bit, but not in the Gritara.
And Jazold says, I understand greed and hatred, but what is delusion? How do I know when it arises? Which one of you wants to take this one?
Venerable?
Okay, sure. So delusion, it reminds me immediately of Ajahn Chah's answer to the question once when he was asked by a woman. He says, "Oh, you're riding the horse, but you can't find the horse." And it's right in this not seeing, not seeing, not knowing, not being able to find. So if we can assert mindfulness in the present moment, we have awareness of what's happening. Then this displaces delusion, actually. And this becomes quite apparent in contrast. So, we usually, if we're practicing breath meditation, for example, sitting in formal meditation, and we might be distracted by various thoughts, for example, or memories or fantasies of the future. And if we can assert some mindfulness and know what we're being distracted by and let it go. For example, Ajahn Chah would recommended sometimes just to be aware of it and say, I'm not really interested in that right now. If we're practicing breath meditation, for example, or thoughts of the future, for example, might think that's uncertain what's going to happen in the future, for example, and then bring ourselves back to the breath, and we notice a clarity there in the mind and awareness in the present moment. And so this is the contrast, the delusion, which is caught up in the past or the future, things that don't really exist. They're fantasies and so on, caught up in thinking, these kinds of things. But an awareness in the present moment of for example, the bodily processes, just one example, displaces this, and then we see the contrast. It becomes clear to us over time when we're lost in delusion, and when we're being aware.
Great. And Dharma Learner has some questions about visiting the monastery. It's best to send an email to the monastery, and the current guest master will answer your questions. And Anjan says, does forming right view depend strongly on intelligence, since it requires learning the sutta as well, among other things? Ayasoma.
Well, I feel a little bit uncomfortable because intelligence actually is such a loaded word. Since what do we mean by intelligence? Do we mean IQ such and such? Do we mean certificate such and such? What do we mean? And actually, I don't think that intelligence necessarily is what is needed in order to form right view, but actually wisdom is what is needed in order to form right view. And we have the wrong view of identifying intelligence or equating intelligence to wisdom. But that's actually not the case. And usually when we think about intelligent people in the West, at least, intelligent people in our culture, these people who are either highly educated or very good in specific disciplines. So perhaps they have a very high IQ, and perhaps they have also very good memory, and they can also recite all the suttas, back to back. But are they actually understanding? And not understanding in terms of like, this is the subject, this is the verb, and this is the complemento oggetto. I don't know how you say it in English. The
direct object.
The direct object, yes. But rather in, the flavor of the Dhamma. What is the message of the Dhamma? So actually, when we look also all these incredible masters. Well, Tan Wade was mentioning Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah, I think, had like 7th, 3rd, or 4th grade, something like that. So very little formal education, very little sort of certificates that we attribute to quote unquote intelligence. But wow, the incredible wisdom that someone like Ajahn Chah had. And, many actually since the beginning, for the past 2,600 years, I'm pretty sure that the majority of enlightened beings probably didn't even know how to write or read So there's a little bit of, actually I'm saying that because the reason why we have so much high literacy level is because of all the different, it's kind of like a fairly new thing, the past century of having these systems of mass education. But for the majority of time, actually, this formal education was actually a very elitist thing. So the majority of monastics weren't, all aristocrats and and people who had access to that sort of privileged life. So I think we need to really qualify what we mean by intelligence. So I would say the right view requires more wisdom, and that we can cultivate regardless.
And Wasabi asks, is equanimity like being neutral? Well, to some degree, it depends what you mean by the word neutral. But as far as understanding equanimity, I find it extremely useful to reflect on the literal meaning of the word. So the Pali word is upekkha, which has 2 parts, upa, which means close, and ikka, which means look. So upekkha literally means looking closely. So this is very important because often when we talk about neutrality, it carries a sense of apathy, a sense of not really caring. Like I'm neutral because I'm not interested or I don't care. But the Pali term upekkha is when you're actually looking so closely at something that you see it as it actually is. And by seeing it as it actually is, you also recognize that there's nothing there to react to. Through the act of close observation, the mind becomes non-reactive. But it's non-reactive through attention and wisdom, rather than non-reactive through apathy or disinterest or a lack of knowledge. So it's a very important distinction there. Okay. And Kumu says, trying to follow the retreat schedule at Empty Cloud as much as I can from home, at least for a day or two or a week. Is dark chocolate and cheese allowed after the main meal at noon with something like tea? Yes. Yes. Hallelujah. Yeah. And Dan says, is there a language spoken today related to Pali, Magadhi, or Bengali? I was thinking about my learning style and what it'd be like to speak to get an intuitive sense of it. So Pali died out about 2,000 years ago, but actually most of the languages spoken in India or close to India are related to one degree or another, but of course separated in time by 2,000 years. So for example, modern day Hindi has much resemblance to Pali, modern day Sinhala has much resemblance to Pali, but neither one is quite like actual Pali. So I would recommend if you want to learn Pali, just learn Pali. Learning contemporary languages is not likely to help you very much. That's my opinion anyway. Okay, Mark says, Ajahn Mun practiced body mindfulness exclusively for many months after having too many nimitta experiences and felt this was a powerful way to quiet his mind. Any thoughts about a one-type practice for months? Tan Wade, what do you think?
Let me ask, any thoughts about a one-time practice?
One type. Like he practiced only one type of meditation for months.
For months, sure.
Yeah.
Well, any thoughts? Sure. Sometimes you find in life something that really works and you go with it. And so if you find a meditation style that's working for you and you're reaping benefits from it, then practicing it for 1, 2, 3, 4 months and alone, I think can be very good. As Ayasoma mentioned earlier, it's good to practice with a teacher, and so to consult a teacher periodically. It is possible to go overboard in a practice, or be getting negative results and not understand them as being negative, for example. But meditation is an art, and over time you learn. When one practice is really yielding results for you, and when you need to change your practice from time to time, getting consultation with a teacher. So.
Good. And Julie says, from a Buddhist perspective, should a person get a vaccine? Parenthesis, not for COVID. I don't feel the need, but I feel my employer wants us to get the vaccine for measles these days to save costs. Ayasoma, what do you think?
Well, that from Buddhist perspective, neither here nor there, in the sense that there's not anything in particular pro or against one vaccine or the other vaccine. And so I don't think I am qualified personally to give any advice in terms of a vaccine for measles, whether one should be doing it or whether one should not be doing it. So I think that's something for you to figure out, a little bit kind of like the taxes. Not qualified to advise on that. Yeah, it's that domain that, yeah. Yep.
Here's a fun one. Pial says, is Upekkha of the fourth jhana the same as the fourth Brahmavihara, or are they completely different in meaning? Tom Wade, what do you think?
Wow, this is same as the Upekkha of the Brahmavihara. Okay, I have to take a moment to kind of get my thoughts together on this. Let's see. The Upekkha of the fourth jhana is the state where the mind is kind of held in from getting involved with going out to objects, getting involved with them so much. initiating liking and disliking, and reaching out to objects and attaching to them, the sense objects, that is. Then we have upekkha as a Brahma Vihara. First, the loving kindness, Brahma Vihara, and compassion, sympathetic joy, and then upekkha. And we arrive at upekkha as a Brahma Vihara through thinking that all beings are the owners of their actions, and they live dependent on their actions. And so if we find ourselves in a situation, for example, where we're aware of someone's suffering, and we might want to help them. And so we might think we might have some loving kindness or some compassion for them, for example. But we find that either they can't receive our help, or we're not in a position to help them. Is we can let go of the situation, kind of not be so emotionally involved with it, and relieve our own suffering by considering that all beings are the owners of their actions. And so I think perhaps this is a way of looking at them in terms of how we arrive at them and their function. This is kind of how I think about the differences between these two, the upekkha Brahma Vihara and the upekkha Vijnana.
There's also a third one, which is the upekkha of the Bojjhangas. I don't know if you want to go into that now, or if we'll save that for another time.
Well, if you could enlighten us,
well, it's not in their question, so we'll have to wait until somebody asks that question.
Can I ask that question?
Only if you ask it to Tan Wade.
Tan Wade.
Toes in the fire. Right. Well, let's see. Okay, I have to. I feel like I could just punt on this, but I wanted to think through it a little bit. So the upekkha of the Bojjhangas, is it in upekkha arrived at? So I'm actually turning it into a question. Is it the upekkha arrived at through the wisdom of seeing the arising and passing away of phenomena? Okay. And it's the mind having experienced piti and grown calm, develops samadhi, and then eventually arrives at equanimity. So it's arrived at perhaps through seeing the rise and fall of phenomena, the impermanence of phenomena. I don't know if qualitatively if it really differs from the equanimity of the fourth jhana.
Interesting though, because correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that there's equanimity that arises through practicing loving kindness and compassion. So the Brahma Vihara equanimity, so recognizing that beings are the owners of their own karma and such. There's the equanimity that arises from concentration, namely through the four jhanas, and then the equanimity that arises through wisdom, namely the Bojjhangas. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting way to divide them up. Okay, lovely.
Yes, that was beautiful. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, actually, maybe we could have you give a whole talk on that subject.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great topic for a Dhamma talk. Okay, TJ says, what is your take on the Platform Sutra of Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Zen, especially in sudden versus gradual awakening? I have to confess it's been quite a while since I studied the Platform Sutra of the sixth patriarch. I remember enjoying the Platform Sutra quite a bit. I remember there being a lot of very deep and profound things. The main part that I remember is the poetry battle towards the beginning of the sutra. But actually, I don't remember much after the poetry battle. So if you wanted to talk about the poetry battle, actually that I have a lot of interesting thoughts on. But the sudden versus gradual awakening, I actually don't remember what he said. Have you read the sutra recently?
No, but I think sudden versus gradual awakening refers to, basically satori versus the gradual training that is more emphasized in perhaps usually the Theravada tradition. I think that. Would you like to talk about that, Bhante?
Yeah, so actually it's a bit of a false dichotomy. So the dichotomy of sudden awakening versus gradual awakening when you dig a bit more deeply into it, you find that the proponents of sudden awakening still talk about preparing the mind to have a sudden awakening. So the gradual training of the mind to be capable of having a sudden awakening. And also the gradual awakening people also admit that there are certain breakthrough moments where the mind seems to have a sudden shift in perspective. It's not always the same snail's pace progression. Every now and then there's little jumps. So on closer analysis, the sudden versus gradual awakening turns out to not really be different perspectives, but rather they're different ways of talking about the path to awakening. And both of them wind up having both a sudden aspect and a gradual aspect. It's more about which aspect one emphasizes. But ultimately, we wind up having both. That's my initial thought, anyway. Do you have a comment on this?
I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem.
I'm not educated in it.
Okay, here's one you might take, though. So Jojo says, I told a friend to get her house sprayed for insecticides. She's got roaches all over her new place. I want for everyone to follow the 5 precepts, but it's roaches. What should she do?
This one is for me?
Yeah.
This is quite this is quite a question. This is good. Because we run into these kinds of dilemmas in life and what to do about them. And so I've just recently returned from the subtropics, from Thailand, and you find this is quite. I was living in the forests and the jungles. And it was quite quite a lot of wildlife, quite a few insects, you know, and you hear them screeching and calling, and they get into the dwellings, the monastic dwellings as well. So you have ants and termites and various creatures chewing away at the dwellings even. And we go through great lengths to try to make them kind of pest proof, you know, putting water moats around the dwellings, for example, or wrapping the columns that support the dwellings in oil soaked rags, even things like this. But they're quite persistent. We find that they've been getting into all the dwellings and getting into the electric systems, chewing on the wires and ruining the electric systems. And I was going to say something. I don't know how people will take this, but I was kind of surprised and taken aback seeing that sometimes the masters actually they actually called in exterminators, and I was quite taken aback by it. I thought this is breaking the first the precepts. You know, the monks have precepts against killing living beings, and and lay people have precepts against killing living beings in the first precept. And for me personally, what I did in that situation was I said, well, I actually didn't know what a better answer was. And I came to the conclusion that I didn't know really what was right to do myself. And so what I did was I kind of put aside the question of, well, are they doing the right thing? Are they breaking a precept? I should think that that's wrong. Are they doing the right thing because they're protecting the monastic dwellings, which were offered to the community by faithful lay people with their hard-earned money? Mm-hmm. And so I took a step back and said, well, what I'll do in this situation is I'm going to let go. And I considered that the situation is it's not mine and it's not me. This is my particular methodology for this. You know. The ants aren't mine and they're not me, and the dwellings and the decisions about this. And so I had some bit of remove from it, and wasn't so emotionally involved in it. Now I suppose if it came to a decision that I had to make, then I'd have to take responsibility for that. And hopefully I'd have some brilliant idea.
It gives you a little bit of compassion for the people who do have to make these decisions. Because sometimes you're faced with really awkward choices where It's kind of like, do I allow the monastery to fall to ruin, or do I exterminate sentient beings? It's like, wow, that's a really awkward choice. May you never have to make those choices.
Mhm.
And Piel says, perhaps upekkha of all three situations are the same, as all are pointing towards fourth jhana. As for metta practice, too, you can enter jhana, maybe. I don't think so. I think that's oversimplifying it. Because I do actually think that there's a distinct difference between equanimity arising, say, from concentration versus equanimity arising through wisdom. So if you force your mind to hold still for an extended period of time, then it won't react to anything. So that is equanimity of a sort, but it's equanimity that is temporary and conditional. Whereas if you cultivate sufficient insight into the impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal nature of phenomena, if you clearly see that nothing is worth clinging to, nothing is worth holding on to, then the mind will also enter a state of equanimity. But this is an equanimity which cannot be altered by external conditions. So for example, if your equanimity is based upon strong concentration, and then your neighbor starts playing heavy metal music during your meditation time, well, that might be the end of your equanimity right there. But if your equanimity is based upon deep insight, then your neighbor playing loud music is not going to disrupt that equanimity at all. It won't affect you at all. So I do think there's a distinct difference between equanimity based on samadhi and equanimity based on wisdom. Now, whether there's a difference between equanimity based on samadhi and equanimity based upon Brahma Viharas, that I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to think more deeply on that, because there is a relationship there. What are your thoughts?
I think best would be to ask Tan Wei.
Okay.
I told you we'd put you to work as soon as you got here.
I'm trying not to punt, so let's see if I can come up with this. Well, you see, one of the things that I noticed you going through this thought process myself, you're trying to answer these questions, is noticing that I thought about it in terms of the kind of the process, the cause and effect relationships, and it suddenly struck me, it's one of the reasons we're asking these questions is I think that we don't, you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we find clear-cut definitions in the sutras. Mm-hmm. Okay. In regard to other questions, I've thought that there perhaps was a reason for this, that there are many things in the sutras that aren't defined very clearly, I think, or with the kind of very precise definitions we might expect for terms, if we're really getting to systematic philosophy, for example. But what we find in the suttas is more discussion of the cause and effect relationships, and what we should do. We take a stepwise instruction. We do this, and then we do that. And we do the third thing, and we have these kinds of experiences until we reach the goal. And so maybe there's something to that with regard to equanimity as well. That we can take a discussion about what exactly the state is like, only so far, till we get to a point where you have to take the practice to that point to experience it for yourself. So there's like Ajahn Chah's simile, you can talk so much about the taste of an apple, but you won't ever know what it really tastes like until you take a bite. And so if we follow the stepwise instructions, for example, for how to develop equanimity as a Brahma Vihara, or if we follow the stepwise instructions for, say breath meditation, for example, to develop concentration, and then eventually develop wisdom, and the equanimity born of wisdom, then we'll see what these states are like, and we'll be reaping the benefits as well at the same time.
Great. And Ayasoma, what are the Bojjhangas?
The 7 factors of enlightenment. So essentially, those 7 things that we need to nourish instead of nourishing what we normally nourish, which is the 5 hindrances. So yeah, that put it simply, that's what it is.
Okay. And Mark also says, in Buddhism, is mind part of samsara? Is my mind part of a greater mind? How does Buddhism explain this? Generally speaking, we would say yes, mind is part of samsara, and your mind is in fact part of a greater mind, which is a giant mass of suffering and delusion. So the objective is actually to drop our attachment to and identification as this great massive suffering. So you can call it mind if you want, but as the Buddha says, dukkhameva upajamanam upajjati. It's just dukkha arising. So you can say it's my mind, you can say it's a greater mind, you can say it's a big mind or a small mind or whatever. It's just suffering. So our practice is to drop our attachment to all of the suffering. So, yep, that's it.
I love it that we're all like smiling.
Yeah, you can tell you're dealing with Theravada Buddhists when we say the most grim, depressing things and everyone gets happy. It's like, yes, it's true. It's all a giant, massive suffering. Yes. Preach it, brother. Okay. And
another great question for Tanwei.
I was just thinking that. Kumo says, is it possible to develop the Brahmavihara meditations into an insight meditation using upekkha?
Using upekkha. Okay, very good. Yes, okay. I think there's actually there's a sutta that addresses this, as I recall. So I apologize for doing recourse to the suttas. As I recall, it says that we for example, practice loving kindness to the state of mind called beautiful, which I believe is a state of mind where you feel really wonderfully happy. I feel very, very bright inside and very happy and this kind of thing. And practice, you start experiencing the jhanas. Okay. And I forget exactly how far along you get in the jhanas, and I have to admit that. Then you start developing equanimity as intentionally by considering the different aspects of your sense experience. So, for example, if you see something that's foul, looks very repulsive, you consider the beautiful aspects of it. If you hear something that sounds really beautifully, you consider the unbeautiful aspects of it, until you become proficient at this, and your mind becomes quite balanced. Okay. And so this you're getting into through kind of using your wisdom and your discernment in seeing things. You develop I believe that you develop the fourth jhana this way, going into the equanimity of the fourth jhana, and just directly watch the rising and passing away of your sense experience, just as it is. This would take you through the insight knowledges. So that I want to make sure I see if I remember the question correctly. Did I answer the question?
It says, is it possible to develop the Brahmavihara meditations into an insight meditation using upekkha?
So insight meditation using upekkha. I think so. So I think that's yes. I think that would be my answer. I think I've hit it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think okay?
Yeah. Okay. And Hasanta says, Bantes, M. Parinibbana Sutra, I assume you mean Maha Parinibbana Sutta, sometimes translated as the Buddha deciding to relinquish the life force in 3M. I don't know what 3M means.
Minutes?
3 minutes?
3.
Anyway, that seems like a volitional decision. Was it realization he would die or deciding to die? My understanding is the Buddha was aware of his own approaching death. But this gets into one of the ongoing debates in Buddhism, which is whether or not a Buddha can prolong their own life indefinitely. But the standard answer is no, they can't. They have a limited lifespan like everybody else. Ton Nick says, what are your thoughts on dry insight versus wet insight? Is dry insight a faster way to get to Nibbana? Ayasoma, what do you think?
I think this is a good question for you. What insight?
Well, I'll tell you what the Buddha had to say about this. Absolutely nothing, because the Buddha never once talked about dry insight. So the whole concept of dry insight was invented at least 1,000 years after the Buddha. So there's absolutely no trace of it found anywhere in the early Buddhist teachings. So I am personally highly skeptical that people invented a faster way to Nibbana 1,000 years after the Buddha, something that the Buddha somehow conveniently forgot to mention. I find this highly unlikely. So no, I don't think dry insight is a faster way to get to Nibbana. In fact, I don't believe dry insight exists, to be perfectly honest. There's no evidence for it in the early text at all. Okay. Hasanta says, the brain is a sense organ sensing thoughts, but we experience kama vipaka for any volitional thoughts. Can you please elaborate on these different types of thoughts?
May I ask for a repeat of the question? Sorry.
So it says, the brain is a sense organ sensing thoughts, but we experience karma vipaka for any volitional thoughts. Can you please elaborate on these different types of thoughts?
Any kinds of thoughts versus volitional thoughts.
So I think the distinction between the mind being aware of mental objects versus deliberately producing mental objects.
Okay. Okay. Volitional thoughts being okay. May I ask? Could volitional thoughts be the decisions like a cetana? Would that be yeah? Okay. Formation. Right. Okay. Well, okay. So you refer to the brain as a sense organ, sensing thoughts, and my understanding is that I have to say I'm not too familiar with neuroscience or neurology and so on, and that when we talk about the mind as a sense organ in Buddhism, we're actually talking about a non-material aspect to the human being or to living beings. We usually refer to it as consciousness or mind. This is distinguished from the brain, which is actually a part of the physical body. And so the mind, this non-physical aspect, is considered to be the agent of initiating the different mental states that we have, including thoughts such as discursive thought, and decisions, which would be the kind of karma or kama. The decision to kill, for example, would be kind of kama, breaking the first precept, for example, for lay people. And so we can have all kinds of random thoughts, fantasies, and just proliferating about various sense experiences that we have. We can have the thought, that's related to a decision to actually take an action. And this is the second kind that's going to result in consequences for us, as I understand this, would constitute karma. And so the footing for that is the mental states of liking or disliking, founded in delusion. Proliferation, of course, also finds its footing in delusion as well. So if we were just letting kind of the mind drift and not having awareness in the present moment, what's actually going on, then we have in place the conditions for volitions to arise, decisions to arise, to take action. So this is where we have to be aware and try to assert mindfulness to prevent this sort of thing happening.
Okay. And Jojo says, I don't really have an idea what I should do as far as this insecticide situation. I've heard the karma is bad, but not as bad as other beings. I'm trying to view spraying the house as a preventative measure versus actively trying to kill. I don't want her roaches dead, but I'm advising with intentions of having them repelled. I'm afraid when it's time for me to make these decisions, when I move into my own place, I will be greatly hurting myself spiritually, but I'm also scared to have bugs all over my new place when the time comes. Please help.
I don't remember anymore.
This was the person who advised their friend to spray insecticides to kill the roaches in their house.
They had already
Yeah.
advised
Yeah.
or not?
Yes, already.
Oh, well, if it's done already, then, I mean, it's a done action. So, so if you haven't done it already, I would say that we kind of are very fast at sort of going towards killing. Actually, when we used to have this infestation at the previous center in New York City, we had this infestation of ants that actually, ants are not even remotely close to roaches. So they're actually quite harmless sentient beings, but they get everywhere. Everywhere. They are really sneaky, much more than roaches. So they would get into the showers. Apparently, there's like soap can have a taste of sugar, so they would get everywhere. And we had like this three floors building, three-story building, and yeah, it was a lot of square feet to clean up from the ants. It was very interesting because personally, at the very beginning of my practice, and I was a lay person, I was just really not killing them because I had taken this precept and I was also running the organization. So it was just a little bit just bad. And so most of the practice was really like looking at the strong urgency of wanting to get rid of those tiny insects that I was feeling like they were, destroying my life. And the more I was practicing, essentially not harming, not killing, not harming, I kind of developed this habit of not killing and not harming. And I remember at a certain point, all the people that were coming, because every week we would have different retreats, new retreats. So different people would come, and they were also dealing with the ants, just like me. And so many people were actually, really suggesting, different ways of exterminating things. They weren't like hardcore Buddhist practitioners who were very new to the practice. So similarly to myself at the beginning of my practice, they were kind of all going towards the sort of the killing kind of resolution. And I remember observing that pattern after, I had overcome that strong sort of urge of killing, these sentient beings myself. And I had actually gotten to the point of, being basically resigned to live with ants my entire life. And I actually started, actually befriending the ants. And I was like talking to the ants. I was spending a lot of time with these ants. And I started really, loving the ants and having compassion for the ants if they were, in a precarious situation. So there was this, this happened all over the course of 3 years. So we had a long relationship. At a certain point, when people were suggesting harming, my little friends, I was very shocked. And my new mind was like, it's just really bizarre how, we all just go straight to the killing, straight to the knife, straight to the, I don't like this, I hate this, it has to stop. How do I get rid of these sentient beings? And especially, once again, because, literally ants were such a nuisance, but there wasn't really it's not that we were all dying of some kind of lethal disease because of the ants. It's literally just time to kind of make sure that they weren't harmed and bring them outside. And so it was more kind of this irritation, but there wasn't really an actual thing that one could touch on that really taught me this tendency of mine that we tend to be surprised by the wars. We tend to be surprised by people acting out on so many defilements, but actually it's just so natural. It's actually really natural, the opposite. It's just so beautiful. I have to say that since Tan Wade has arrived, he is so full of metta, radiating metta. It's just so exceptional. It's just really fantastic. And so this is what we should be surprised. And I asked her back, I'm like, oh, how lovely, how incredible, and this is actually not something that one should take for granted. It's the result of training the mind. It's the result of purifying the mind, purifying the heart. It's the result of practice. And so that's what we need to a little bit focus more on, kind of trying to develop that, which also brings actually all the different Brahma Viharas. Instead of just sitting and like, metta, may everyone be happy, or like equanimity, but rather like really training ourselves, restraining ourselves from killing, restraining ourselves from harming, and all of these kind of, the Brahma Viharas have a more fertile soil where to kind of just come into being. And then, of course, there are certain situations. Unfortunately, that's the state of, just being in samsara, where sometimes we are faced in some kind of that maybe at a certain point, we have to be in kind of the situations that Venerable was describing before, that are really, really terrible situations, where it's like a lose-lose situation, and when we are faced with those circumstances, well, once again, what can we do? We just have to make the least worst decision that we have on hand, and understand that we will reap the consequences of those actions, and that unfortunately we're in that situation and there's nothing else that we can do. But I feel like that before getting to that point, we should really try to train ourselves as much as possible in avoiding what seems unavoidable.
Great. And Joe, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. I have a spiritual friend who shared that they don't feel they have enough love to share with others. And my question for the Sangha would be, how does one cultivate an abundance of love?
That's a great question for the resident metta expert.
Well, wow. We've only been here about 6 hours.
Some people quickly rise to the top.
Let's see. How do we cultivate an abundance of metta? What an inspiring question. It's a wonderful aspiration. Okay. So Anumotana, Sadhu, your interest in this. Well, it's I would say, in my own humble opinion, that it's a matter of putting forth the effort in the simple practice of wishing for the welfare of ourselves and other beings. And it is quite a lofty ideal, but I think it's accomplished kind of step by step, just by simply staying on the theme, exerting the effort even in circumstances where we might not naturally feel like generating love and kindness. That over time, the abundance of metta grows and grows and grows. For example, if we're actually sitting in formal meditation practice with the intention to cultivate loving kindness, we want to try and stay on track, exert the effort to stay on track with this theme of may I be well, happy, and peaceful, and may my teachers or my parents be well, happy, and peaceful. In trying to stay on this theme, just as though as if we were practicing breath meditation, for example, we might try to stay with the theme of the breath. And when we become distracted, we become aware of what we're distracted by and bring the mind back to the meditation object. And then when we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, trying to remember that we are trying to cultivate this emotion, this divine abiding, or sometimes call this mature emotion of loving kindness, which is by its very nature very skillful emotion. For example, if we find ourselves, someone is treating us in a way that we don't like to be treated, for example, quite common. Interpersonal issues are part and parcel of being a samsara, I think. If animals, ants, our pet dog, or if traffic isn't going in the way that we want it to, we always trying to remember that the difference between skillful emotions and unskillful emotions, irritation, anxiety, anger, being on the dark side, as it says in the sutras, and bringing our mind back to loving kindness, the bright side. And so over time, the exerting the effort and persevering on this theme, then it does quite naturally. I think it's quite even surprising how naturally we do find we progress in this way. From a simple formula like that.
Okay, and Sud says, to what extent do you think the diligent lay practitioners can progress on the path in this day and age with all its distractions and responsibilities of day-to-day lay life? To the extent that they wish to. So if you wish to make progress, then you will. If you wish to find excuses to not make progress, then you will.
Elliot?
Yes, Venerable. I have to confess that as I was ruminating, preparing this question, that there was at least tinged with aversion. But I wanted to take this opportunity to push back. Like when you look at, I would think that the Kalama Sutta would be like a really good guideline for examining teachings that don't fall in line with the suttas. But like you could see, like within Jainism, for example, you could find profound goodness in there, and then there's also the practices that the Buddha really called out. So I'm curious as to like what the kind of wisdom, the logic is to, if there's something like the Abhidhamma, which I haven't studied, where there's clearly some parts of it that were written by people who are arhats, and some things that really seem to, from what I understand, contradict the Buddha's teaching. Why would you just like kind of dismiss the whole thing as opposed to say, well, I'm going to examine this with a really discerning eye. I'm not going to take anything for granted. If it really contradicts something, then I'm going to be hesitant. But don't you think that it's better to at least have that attitude towards it as opposed to, well, take it with a grain of salt? Sorry if that was too corporate.
I don't think anyone has suggested to toss the whole Abhidhamma.
Yeah, I mean, actually, everything you just said sounds like something that I would say. So I'm actually not sure we're in disagreement here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Aversion has left.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree. Of course, I love the suttas, but you will find lots of really great Dhamma in apocryphal sources. And you'll also find some really wretched Adhamma, but you will find some really beautiful Dhamma in apocryphal sources, but you have to read it very carefully.
Yeah, I think we've quoted actually Ajahn Chah for quite some time, and definitely he wasn't contemporary to the Buddha.
Yeah,
that's what
Ajahn Chah's teachings are in fact apocryphal.
Yes.
So Pial says, emptiness is defined in the suttas as essentially emptiness of self. Is it equivalent to ending of Sakaya Ditti, or does it mean emptiness of all phenomena, or sum of all sankharas equal to emptiness? So I don't know what sum of all sankhara is equal to emptiness. I don't know what that means. Is emptiness equivalent to ending of Sakaya Ditti? That seems way too narrow. It seems much too narrow. So first off, sunyata as it's defined in the suttas is not only emptiness of self in the sense of emptiness of self-identity. It does seem to be a broader statement of emptiness of self-existence, in which case the concept of emptiness of all phenomena does seem to be applicable. And this is clearly laid out in, for example, the Kachanagota Sutta. This is one place where the Buddha really targets this directly. It's actually a whole sutta about emptiness where the Buddha never directly uses the word emptiness. But he is in fact talking about emptiness of all phenomena in that sutta, as he is in many places in the Pali Canon. But I don't know what sum of all sankharas mean. Do you have any idea what this person's talking about?
Sorry. Okay. Is it sum of all sankharas? Is it SUM?
Yeah,
Yes, sum.
like adding up all sankharas is equal to emptiness.
Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to form a thought. So if we add the sum of all sankharas, is it equal to emptiness? That all sankharas are supported by conditions and don't have any inherent existence.
Mm.
So that's which I think is it just sounds like a Tibetan Tibetan formulation, but which I think is valid.
Yeah, actually, I think yeah, okay, yeah.
That's great. A Tibetan.
Papunchifying things. Okay.
We're creating neologisms.
Yeah.
Papunchifying.
Oh, cute story. So Mark says about the ants or insects or roaches, they says, sometimes lavender, peppermint, or cinnamon oil will repel bugs. Was successful for me several times, but takes persistence. I once carried over 150 spiders out of my basement, and I learned to see them as suffering beings with a tough life. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And TJ here is quoting from the Dhammapada. If you are non-reactive like a broken bell, then you have reached Nibbana and no conflict can be found in you. Dhammapada 134. It's actually one of my favorite Dhammapada verses. And they ask, is this broken bell simile or the saw simile more useful to you? Ayasoma, broken bell or saws? Which one?
Both, actually, I will say, depending on the right time.
Don Wade, broken bell or saws?
Sure, well, that's an interesting question. Because you ask it on a personal level, which one is
Yes.
okay. So I actually wasn't familiar with that Dhammapada verse. So but I actually quite frequently reflect on the simile of the saw. I found it quite helpful in my own practice of not being reactive, and also in a negative way, but developing loving kindness. Quite a simple teaching, and I used it quite frequently. If it says, even if someone were to saw off your limbs, as I recall. If you give rise to anger because of that, then you're not really following the Buddhist teachings. And so in various difficult circumstances in my life, I think, well, how does this compare to someone sawing my limbs off? and I always had to say, well, this is actually not as bad. So it's helping put things into perspective, and then say, okay, well, I guess I can develop loving kindness in this situation.
Sadhu. Actually, what comes to mind in terms of the broken bell is when we do the Tudong in Italy, that I'm usually the only one who speaks the language. And normally people say I have to say really nice things, but sometimes not really. Because I'm the only one who understands, actually there were these moments where I was, having a strong reaction, but the rest of the group was just having a really good time. And sometimes it's very interesting to have these insights on how, there can be so much emotional turmoil when in reality it's just sound. And when you perceive sound in the herd, let there only be the herd, then there is actually no dukkha. And when there is instead all of that, kind of layer that we have of the interpretation, the wanting and the not wanting, and all of that, then there is the sort of experience of dukkha that arises. And so yes, they were all broken bells. And it's very useful to aspire to that.
And Hasanta says, can you elaborate on the word Gandhabba, please? How is it different to the Atman or soul concept that is rejected in the Dhamma? Well, so, did you want to answer this one?
No.
Okay.
I think Teddy volunteered. Teddy, the monastic
Teddy
guy.
he might have just seen a Gandhabba. So Gandhabba, in the suttas, the term Gandhabba, it is almost always used to refer to a certain classification of devas, quite low-ranking devas who are characterized by addiction to sensuality, kind of like the party animals of the deva world. And there is, as far as I'm aware, there is exactly one sutta where Gandhabas are mentioned in the context of a being being conceived. And it's been 2,500 years, and nobody can agree on what the heck Gandhabas are doing in that sutta and what it has anything to do with beings being conceived and born. And like, is the Gandhabba a word that means a consciousness about to enter a body, or is it that Gandhabas like to watch when new beings are being conceived? Like, it's really, the sutta is not clear on this point. So there's actually no consensus about what Gandhabas have to do with conception. So how is it different to the Atman or soul concept? I don't think it has anything whatsoever to do with the Atman or soul concept. I mean, I still just think that Gandhabba just means the party devas, and I don't think that Gandhabba means a soul being passed into a new body. I think that would be a complete misunderstanding of the suttas. Those are my thoughts anyway. Yeah. Okay. And that's the last question from online. Do we have any questions from the audience here? We still have a couple minutes left. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is on the Rupa jhanas. So the Buddha similes that he gives in the suttas talks about suffusing like the entire body in piti, sukha, or upekkha. And so my question is around, some of these jhana factors that at least to me appear to be more mental, like less physical. How does one go about suffusing the entire body with something that isn't necessarily physical? Or is it that each jhana factor has a physical component or something else? So for example, like contentment in the third jhana, is that something that one then suffuses the whole body sort of like actively, or is there something else?
Well, one thing is that as your concentration becomes more advanced, the distinction between body and mind starts to become a little less relevant. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that. But actually, like the imagery of saturating the whole body with euphoria, saturating the whole body with ecstasy, I think that's actually very relevant. So especially if one is using mindfulness of the body as one's samadhi practice, then deliberately suffusing and saturating the body with pleasant sensation, with this ecstatic euphoria that we call piti. I think that's actually a very apt way of describing the development of samadhi. And particularly the Buddha is emphasizing there also the deliberate aspect, that you don't necessarily just sit around and wait for samadhi to just happen all by itself, but you actually do sometimes, often even, need to put forward a genuine effort to develop piti. You can sit around and wait for it for a very long time without it ever appearing. But if you make a deliberate effort to produce it and intensify it and suffuse the whole body with it, then you will make much swifter progress in the development of samadhi. So those are my thoughts off the top of my head. Yeah.
Thank you. If I may ask a follow-up, if there's no time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
So let's say someone's practicing samadhi and there is a physical component that feels very blissful, but also something emerging that feels more subtle, more refined, less physical, right? Like, is there I think in my practice, I'm trying to pick up on and attune to something that's more subtle amidst something that's more gross yet very blissful, if that makes sense. And I'm not quite sure how to pull that more subtle, refined thing into the felt sense of the whole body, because this other thing is sort of dominating that experience.
I think we should talk tomorrow, because I think this is not a short conversation that you're starting right now. Yeah. And we have a couple more questions online, and we're almost out of time. So let's see. Cameron says, do you have any recommendations for whether to interpret a sutta literally versus illustratively? Sometimes the literal understanding of the suttas gives me no clear value or understanding. Ayasama, what do you think?
Can't think of a sutta that one should interpret illustratively. I usually take them pretty literally. Actually, I kind of get a little bit uncomfortable when we get into the sort of metaphor, because then we can kind of go like, oh, rebirth is a metaphor. Karma is a metaphor. We can kind of go in the sort of sense of, we can be guided a little bit more by our defilements, by our likes and dislikes, rather than actually being sort of present with what the message presented is there. So if you find that a sutta gives you no clear value or understanding, I think sometimes the case is to, well, sometimes there are certain things that we're just not ready. Our practice is not mature or ready to kind of understand, or maybe some other suttas can be actually a little bit sort of later developments that maybe are not actually early Buddhism, etc. So they can create a little bit of doubt in the mind. In all of these cases, I would just shelf it. But most of the time, just find a senior, someone who's ahead of you in the path, and ask questions. Go to a teacher and ask questions. Go, I don't understand this sutta. Why does it say this? I don't get it. What's up with that? And really kind of give it, rather than getting fixated in one's understanding of what one's reading, or getting fixated in like, this is wrong, or only this interpretation is true, or I read in that book that's what it is. Like really kind of investigating that. So actually, ideally, one would have even more than one teacher. And you can kind of ask the same question to everyone. If you have that opportunity. I used to do that all the time. That's actually great benefit of, organizing Dharma programs with different teachers, is that then you have the opportunity to ask, questions to different practitioners. But I know that you also go to different monasteries. So just really actively ask questions to all the different monastics that you have the opportunity to meet.
Great. And we have one last very quick question. PL says, is Kaya Sati, body witness, same as spreading the entire body with piti or rapture? So the term Kaya Sati refers to a person who has personally experienced all of both the form jhanas and the formless samadhi attainments, and also has attained full awakening. So that's quite a bit more than just spreading the entire body with piti. So spreading the entire body with piti is part of the practice of developing first jhana. But a Kaya Sati is an arhat who has developed all of the both form and formless attainments. So that's a much more advanced development of meditation. So that's the last question. So thank you all for joining in another delightful monk chat, and special thank you to Ton Wade for his first appearance with us. And we'll end the session now with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.